I am Pastor Matt. I'm the Family Life Children's pastor here. And so today, I got to tell you, got to be honest, you're going to get a little bit of a glimpse of what it's like for your kids over there in our kids area. Because today we're talking about Esther. We're talking about the book of Esther, the story of Esther. And the way we're going to do it is I'm going to give you a good old-fashioned Bible story this morning. I'm going to just kind of summarize the story of Esther. So for those of you that maybe were in Sunday school when you were a kid, it might be a little bit of a flashback for you to those days of listening to a Bible story. For those of you that maybe this is your first time here or you didn't grow up, this is a kind of a chance to just have a moment where you pretend like you're little again. You're just listening. Now, I got to be honest, though. I'm not going to pull some of the content that was pulled when we were kids. Because the story of Esther has some adult content, if you will. And I remember as a kid, that wasn't included. I didn't really hear those parts. We're going to go ahead and we're going to cover the whole story today and then explore what that means for us and what it is we can learn about God as we take a look at this story. So Esther, the story of Esther, the book of Esther, it took place about 400 years before Jesus was born, a little over 400 years before Jesus was born, in the land of Persia, in Persia. And the king at the time, the ruler, was Xerxes. And it was a time of prosperity. Things were going good in the kingdom. There were several kingdoms that were a part of the Persian kingdom. And King Xerxes, he wanted to display the wealth and prosperity of the land. So he threw a party for 180 days, a half a year. They threw a big party to celebrate the prosperity of their kingdom. Invited nobles and officials and people from the land to come and partake in the festivities. And then the final week, the last week, at the end of the party, they invited pretty much everyone to come. Poor and rich, great and small. Hey, come and let's celebrate how great Persia is. And during that final week of festivities, there was a moment where the king thought, you know what? I want to show off Queen Vashti, his queen. She was beautiful. He wanted her to come. He wanted to show her off. But she was in another part of the palace, and she was entertaining the women. So they were separated, and she was entertaining the women. The attendants came, and they said, hey, the king wants you to come, and he wants to show you off in front of all of the men that are here, all the people that are here. And she said, no, I'm not coming. And we don't know if that's because she was busy. She felt like, you know what, I have guests here that I have to attend to, or if it's that she was offended that he wanted to just show her off and just wanted her to come and perform for all these other men. But she says, no, I'm not coming. So they come back and tell the king and his advisors and attendants, and the king's not happy about it. The attendants, the advisors, they're even more upset about it. His officials, his nobles, they're even more upset about it because in their mind, they're like, man, if word gets out that the queen refused your request, pandemonium's going to break out. Women are going to start doing whatever they want. They're going to stop just blindly obeying their husbands. It's going to be chaos. I'm not an advocate of that, by the way. I need to clarify. I don't include that part to say that that's the way I think it should be. I'm just saying that's what they were afraid of. They were afraid that the women would no longer respect their husbands with blind disobedience, a misguided thought. And so they advise, hey, you need to banish the queen from your presence. She can never, ever come in your presence again, and you need to remove her as queen, and you need to find a new queen. And the king had been partaking in the festivities, so he maybe was not of his full sound mind, and he thought, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. We're going to do that. So he went ahead and decreed it, had her banished. But then a little bit of time passed, and he came to himself and thought, oh man, I liked her. She was great, but now there's nothing I can do about it. I certainly can't. So they came and he said, well, what should I do? I want a queen. What should I do? His advisor said, well, hey, his attendants said, let us go out into the land and we will find a new queen for you. We'll go out and make a decree that all the young, beautiful virgins that we go and select, they have to come to the palace and have the opportunity to be selected by you to be their queen. And so they went out, they brought them in. They went through a year of beauty treatments before they were presented to the king. A year long of beauty treatments. And this is where Esther enters the story, because Esther, she was of Jewish descent, and her parents had passed away, and she had been raised by her older cousin Mordecai. And Mordecai heard about this decree and knew that they had to obey, and possibly also saw a chance for them to better their position. And so Esther was sent to the palace. Immediately she found favor with the king's attendants. She was beautiful, and they thought, man, this could be the one. So they paid special attention and special care to her beauty treatments over the next year. And then what would happen is they were presented to the king for the evening, and if he enjoyed their conversation and their intellect, amongst other things, then maybe they would be the new queen. Well, Esther was presented. The king loved her company, and she was made the new queen. And so now, I think if we want to take a little break, and because for those of you that didn't catch that, she had to sleep with the king. She had to go, and she was like almost like a concubine. These women were brought in and just presented to the king for his own enjoyment and entertainment, and then from them he was able to select which one he wanted to be his queen and continue to be under his command and his ability to summon whenever he wanted. So right away we're posed with this question of like, man, there's some stuff going on here. It doesn't really seem like this is how God would want things to go. If Mordecai and Esther are followers of God, this seems like behavior that's unbecoming to somebody that loves God, right? That Mordecai would just offer her up, and that Esther would willingly go and would partake in this. But I think it's critical that we recognize the humanity involved in the story, because I think it's going to play a part as we understand what it is that God's trying to tell us later on as we explore more about it. So we'll continue with the story here. So Esther's been selected to be the queen, and then there was a noble named Haman. And Haman was a rich man. He had contributed to the kingdom and played a part in the king's palace, and he had just been appointed as the highest official in the palace in the kingdom, aside from the king, and he was pretty jazzed about this. He was pretty excited. So he goes out, and it's made a rule that everyone in the palace and everyone, they must bow whenever Haman comes around. They must bow in submission and honor and all of that. But Mordecai refused to do so. And once again, we don't really know why. We don't know if it's because he was convicted about it, the same way that like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, another story from around this time of three men that would not bow to the idol of a king because they were convicted that really the only one we should bow and surrender to is the one true God. So we don't know if that's where Mordecai's, or if he just didn't like Haman. He might have just been like, I don't like this guy. I'm not bowing to him. He's kind of a jerk. Whatever the case, whatever the reason, Haman wasn't happy about it. And he had some people around him going, well, hey, what are you going to do about this? And you got to remember this idea of setting examples. We can't let pandemonium break out. So he thought, not only do I need to get rid of Mordecai, I need to get rid of his entire people. I want to get rid of all the Jews in the land, not just Mordecai. Seems a little extreme to me for him not wanting to bow, but nonetheless, that's what Haman thought. So he went to the king, and he presented this idea, hey, there's a people here. I don't think he gave the king a lot of details. He said, hey, there's a people here. They're disrespectful. They do their own thing. They don't really submit to your laws and your ways. We need to do something about it. And the king, who seems to be a pretty easygoing guy at this point, seems to be like, yeah, that sounds good whenever people present an idea. He's like, yeah, sure, here's my ring. Here's my ring with the signet that you can put into law, whatever you want. Go take care of it, Haman, I trust you. So he goes off, and Haman has lots cast. They roll dice or whatever it is that they do to determine the day that all of the Jews in the land of Persia will be executed. And that's casting lots. It's called Purim or Purim. And so they cast the lots on March 7th. So almost a year later is selected as the day, and it's sent out as a decree that on March 7th, all the Jews in the land will be executed. And that they are not allowed to fight back. There's nothing they can do about it. Well, Mordecai, who at this point had found a way to become a worker official in the palace so that he could keep tabs on Esther and how she's doing, he caught wind of this, obviously. It was a pretty public decree. And he was upset about it. Went into mourning. He starts not eating. He starts to look just downtrodden. Now, here's an important thing to note. When Esther was brought to the palace, when Mordecai sent her in, he said, do not say that you are of Jewish descent. Don't tell anyone. All right? Keep that under wraps. And this was before this decree was made, but for some reason Mordecai thought, let's go ahead and not say that. You need to not tell anybody. So the queen's officials, Esther's officials, they didn't know that Mordecai and Esther were related, but they knew that they had been communication. They had a relationship of some kind, so they came to her and said, hey, Mordecai, this guy, something's wrong. Something's not okay. He's not doing well. So Esther begins to communicate with him, and he says, hey, this decree has been made, and you need to do something about it. You need to go and you need to talk to the king. But Esther replies to him and says, I haven't been summoned by the king for several months now. I can't just go to the king. That's not how it works. As a matter of fact, anyone that entered the king's presence, went into the court, or tried to approach the king without being summoned or without permission, they could be executed on the spot. And the only way that they could be spared is if they entered and the king raised his gold scepter to basically indicate they're okay. It's all right, don't chop their head off. I'll let them talk. So she's leery of doing, she's afraid that maybe the king hasn't summoned me because he's upset. I don't want to just come barging in. And the king's like, off with her head. So she says, I don't feel okay with this. So then Mordecai replies, and this is the part of the story that if you have ever heard this story, you're probably the most familiar with. And it's Mordecai trying to spur Esther to action. We're actually going to read this part so we get the direct quotes here because we're going to come back to it a little bit later. So in Esther 4:13-14, Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? It's that quote. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Who knows if all of this has led to this moment, and this is the purpose, and this is the reason that you're here. So, Queen Esther replies to Mordecai and says, hey, have all of the Jews that you know, anyone you can get in contact with, have them fast and pray, because I am going to approach the king. I am going to try and do something. And after 3 days of prayer and fasting, she goes and she enters the court of the king, and he chopped her head off, and that's the end of our story. No, he raises his scepter, and she's okay. She's okay to proceed. So she comes forward, and he says he was happy to see her because he says, hey, what do you want? Up to half the kingdom, I'll give it to you. What do you want? Again, this guy, he's just like an easygoing guy. Just like, hey, what do you want? I'll give you half of everything I have. I don't care, just ask. She says, well, I'd love to have a banquet with you and with Haman. And he says, all right. She said, tonight, I want to have a banquet. So Haman hears about this, and he is just out of his mind psyched, right? Things are just going great, right? The Jews are going to be eliminated. He's been made the highest official. He's just been invited to a private banquet with the king and the queen. So they show up. They enjoy the food, they enjoy the drink, and then the king says, okay, what do you really want, Esther? There's no way you risk your life just to invite us to dinner. What is it you want? She says, well, a second dinner. I'd love for you to come back tomorrow night and have another banquet. And I would like Haman to come as well. So Haman leaves on top of the world. He's loving life. And then he comes across Mordecai as he's leaving the palace, and Mordecai does not bow, and all that rage comes back, and he's so upset. He goes home, he brags to his wife and to his friends about how well his life is going, but then he says, but then Mordecai, as long as that Mordecai's alive, I can't really enjoy all this. And so his wife advises him. Now, usually in moments like this, my wife takes the opportunity to be like, hey, honey, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it's okay. Right? Things are going pretty good. I think you can overlook this and enjoy what's going on. But instead, she offers this advice. You know what I think you should do, honey? I think you should build a 75-foot sharp pole and impale Mordecai on it. What? What? Once again, seems a little extreme to me. Right? But that's her advice. Hey, I can tell that this is really bothering you. I think impaling the guy is going to make you feel a lot better, sweetie. I think this would be a good idea. I think this is what we should do. Haman loves the idea. So he goes out and he makes a plan for this pole to be made and prepared that night because he wants to go to the king the next morning to tell the king that he thinks Mordecai is a problem and needs to be executed. Well, another part of the story that was critical is when Mordecai first came into service in the palace, he was at the gate and he overheard a plot to assassinate the king. He overheard two of the king's attendants that were upset, and they were coming up and devising a plan to assassinate the king, and Mordecai had told Esther, and Esther was able to reveal this to the king. Well, that night, the night before the second banquet, the king, he couldn't sleep, so he went ahead and he started looking through the history books to try and doze off, and he comes across this account of Mordecai, who had saved his life, basically. And he calls in some of his other advisors and attendants and says, hey, did we ever do anything for this Mordecai guy? Did we ever honor him in any way for saving my life? And they said, no, we didn't. And so the king wants to do something for him. He says, I need some advice. He needs lots of advice. This king needs lots of advice. So he says, who's here? And they said, well, Haman just got here, because Haman was coming to ask if he could go in and execute Mordecai. And he says, bring him in. Bring him in. Haman, buddy, there's somebody I want to honor. I want to do something for somebody. What would you want done for you if you were going to be honored? And Haman thinks, well, surely it must be me that the king wants to honor. He thinks this is some kind of secret Santa deal going on, where the king is like, hey, I pulled somebody's name from the hat, and I'm just wondering, what would you want for Christmas if you... And so Haman, he begins to tell him, well, what I think you should do is I think you should get some royal robes that you've worn. I think you should get a royal horse that you've ridden. You should get one of your highest officials, and you should have them lead this man around on this horse wearing these royal robes. And that man should be shouting that this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. The king goes, that's a great idea. Haman, I want you to do this for Mordecai. I want you to lead him around on one of my royal horses, wearing one of my royal robes, shouting to the people, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. So, Haman's, he's coming down a little bit here, you know? He's been riding the high horse. He's been pretty excited about life, but, you know, some things are not going his way now. Not only is he not the one that's going to be honored, not only is it Mordecai that is the one that is going to be honored in his stead, but he's the one that actually has to walk around and do this for Mordecai. And I'm pretty sure that he knew in this moment, well, I can't exactly come back from that and be like, now here's what we need to do. We need to kill that guy. Right? So he knows his plot to take care of Mordecai and to impale him on this wonderfully made 75-foot sharp pole is not going to work. But hey, he's still got the banquet. He's still got the banquet, the second banquet. You know what? I'm still the only one that was invited to this banquet with the king and queen. So they go to the banquet, and the king, once again, after they finish, says, Esther, what is it you really want? What do you really want? And she breaks down. She says, I would love for you to spare the lives of me and my people. She reveals her Jewish descent, and she says, there's been a decree that's been made to eliminate my entire people from the land. And you've been deceived into thinking they're wicked, and now they're all going to be executed on March 7th. And the king goes, what? Who would think of such a horrible plan? Who would do such a thing? And she's like, well, Haman, this guy right here that's with us. Now Haman's pretty much at rock bottom here. He knows it's over. The glory days are gone. Because the king is just enraged. He actually leaves the room. He's just in such a rage. And Haman begins to plead for his life with Esther. And when the king comes back in, he thinks Haman is assaulting Esther. So he's like, what? Even now? Even in my own presence, you're going to attack my wife? And he was taken away. Haman was immediately, they covered his head and they take him away. Any guesses as to how they decided to execute? Excuse the smirk, but I love tragic comedies. And this just... They impale him on his own 75-foot pole that he had made for Mordecai. Talk about the irony. And just how crazy this guy went from the top to the very bottom. So then the king comes to Esther and says, well, what do I do? And she says, well, just take the decree back. And he says, well, I can't. My signet ring, it was put on the decree, and once that's done, a decree cannot be revoked. So what I can do is I can make a new decree that the Jews can now defend themselves. That if they are attacked, they are able to attack back. That they can defeat their foes that come after them. And we'll make it so that it's no longer just an execution. They actually have a chance to fight back. And so the date rolls around and they do so. They're delivered. They're able, even through it, they're able to eliminate a lot of their enemies and their foes. The ones that wanted them gone are the ones that come and attack them, and they're able to have victory over them. So this is a crazy story. Like I said, a lot of parts when I was a kid that weren't in there. They weren't involved. But we have to ask, so what does this mean? What do we do with this? What does this tell us about God? And I want us to head back to the part in Esther 4:13-14 in just a moment. But it's important for us to note, again, this is a strange book because God is never directly mentioned in the book of Esther. There's no point in the book of Esther where it says, then God said this, or God requested or commanded, or here's what God was thinking, here's what God was doing. There's no mention of his name in the entire book. So even though the book is devoid of his name, I don't think that it means it's devoid of his presence. I don't think that it means that the story of Esther is devoid of God working in the midst of the story and working to deliver his people. So there was that piece this week that I was wrestling with as finalizing some of the preparations. Okay, well, God's not mentioned. What does that mean? And then there was another part as I was reading over and over and over this part where Mordecai's talking to Esther, there was something that struck me as interesting. It's that there's a combination here of Mordecai's God-given faith when he says, even if you don't do anything, then relief for the Jews will come from some other place. In essence, God will deliver us. God will save his people. Combined with his own human insecurity. Because Mordecai, it seems that Mordecai threatens Esther. That he tells her, hey, just because you're in the palace, don't think that you're going to escape what's going to happen here. Right? Surely God will deliver his people, but you and your family will die. We don't know if that's him directly being like, I'll make sure that people know who you really are, or just, hey, word's going to get out. It's going to get found out that you are a Jew, and this won't end well for you. So we have his own human insecurity, his own attempt to manipulate the situation, combined with this God-given faith that he ultimately does know and trust that God's going to deliver the Jewish people. And so, wrestling with, well, what does that mean? How does that work? And I was struck with this thought that, you know what? It's interesting that just seems to be throughout the Bible and the stories of the Bible. Of God working in the midst of our brokenness, with our brokenness, in spite of our brokenness, through our brokenness. That God chooses to raise us up, to take the moments of pain and hurt and heartache, the bad decisions that we make that lead us to moments, and he chooses to use those to transform us to mold us, and to prepare us so that we can join him in the things that he wants to accomplish. Now, a while back when thinking about, because I love this moment of inspiration, I love this moment where Mordecai says to Esther, who knows, perhaps it was such a time as this that you have been put in the place you're in. And one of the best illustrations I can come up with was several years ago, Kaylee and I were helping with a winter camp. And we were put in charge of late night activities and doing fear factor stuff. That's sort of, it was big at the time. You got to eat gross stuff, do things maybe you're like afraid to do. And so we had been doing this all throughout the winter camp, and it came to the final challenge. It culminated with us making a shake out of just all the stuff. It had a buttermilk base, which if you've had buttermilk by itself, it sounds delicious, buttermilk pancakes and all, but buttermilk's not great. It's not great by itself. And then we put Spam, we put clam juice, we put sardines, we put pig's feet. I mean, this thing was, I held it up, I got it up here to my nose, and my throat was like, nope, you're not doing it. No. Like closed up immediately, would not even. And so we tell the kids, we've got these shakes. You're going to have to send up one person from each team. There were 4 teams. One person from each team that's going to come up and has to chug this shake. The winner is going to get just a crazy amount of points. Well, immediately the kids, they start looking around, talking to each other. Nobody wants to go up. I don't want to do it. Will you do it? But there was one team and one girl. She sat in the back of the room, like the back the whole time. We present this challenge. Kids are all looking around, wondering what to do. She stands up and just starts walking to the front of the room. This is like legit. This is totally how this happened. She walks to the front of the room. She doesn't look to the kids beside her. She doesn't consult with the team. She just stands up and starts walking up. As she passes some of her fellow teammates, they're like, oh, that's right, Sandra's here. Sandra will eat anything. And they start getting excited. The other teams that see her coming up are like, oh man, we don't stand a chance. So they reluctantly select a few kids to come up. We begin the challenge. One kid starts to drink and just spits it out everywhere. Another kid hurls in the garbage can right next to him. Sandra takes this thing and just boom, pounds it, and slams a cup on the ground, and then walks back to her seat. Goes and sits down. We got home, we got back into our cabin that night, and I told Kayla, I go, that was the most Estery thing I have ever seen in my entire life. It was like Sandra heard that and went, yep, this is why I'm here. And she just got up, and she starts walking to the front for such a time as this. Sandra, your life has led to this moment. She wasn't looking for accolades. She wasn't looking for glory. She just knew what she had to do, and she did it. Now, here's the thing. There has to be more to it than just us accomplishing something for our own glory. There has to be more to it than our lives leading up to moments where people inspire and spur us into action to do something great and amazing, because it cannot be devoid of God in order for it to accomplish what God wants it to accomplish. Our heart has to be in the right place, right? God is so sovereign, he's so good, that as Mordecai said, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. God has a plan, he's going to accomplish it. God has a plan, he's going to do it. But he invites us to be a part of it. In our brokenness, in our pain, in our awkwardness, our inadequacy, he invites us to be a part of what he's doing. He invites us to be a part of his plan. Why does he do this? Because he loves us. He has relationship with us. He wants to do it with us. Even though we're broken, even though we fall short, he fills in the gaps. In the same way that in Romans 5:8 read, but God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners, while we were still broken, Before we reached out to him, before we were healed by him, he died for us. He sacrificed himself for us. And in the same way, he's not waiting until we're perfectly fixed, until we're perfectly ready. He plans for moments where we can be used where we're at and the way we are, because he loves us. It's the same idea as every Christmas rolls around. I'm a Christmas nut. I love Christmas. I love decorating for Christmas. And every year, it rolls around and it's time to decorate the Christmas tree. Oh, it's like one of my favorite things. And we've done it every year. We're going to do it every year. It's going to happen. A tree, at least one, sometimes more than should be ever put up in one house, are put up in our house. But now, we have 4 beautiful little kids. And we want them to be a part of decorating that tree. It doesn't always turn out how we'd like it when they decorate it. It's always like, oh yeah, I don't know if I'd put that there. But because we love them, because we want to have a relationship with them, we want them to be a part of it. We want them to decorate the tree with us. We want them to make that memory. We want them to share in that joy. And with God, it's the same way. Even though sometimes we step in and our humanity plays a part and we still kind of fumble and we still kind of, he says, no, I love you so much, I want you to be a part of what I'm doing. This week at Royal Family Kids Camp, God has a plan for those kids' lives. And he has invited all of those counselors that we just prayed for up here to be a part of that plan. He's invited them to share in the joy of fulfilling the way that he wants to minister to those kids. And God has a plan for the Tri-Cities. He has a plan for Faith and how he wants to use this church to reach the community. And he invites each of us as individuals, as a part of this family, to be a part of that. Even though we're not perfect, even though we sometimes fumble and our humanity comes out and comes in, he says, I want you. I have prepared you for such a time as this, in your brokenness, to be a part of what I'm doing. Please come along. Come join me. I love you and I want to share this with you. So I think it's important for us as we prepare. Summer's coming to a close, and fall, we're getting ready to launch life groups. We've got a block party happening at the end of September where we're going to hopefully just get people inviting friends to come and be a part of what's happening. Because we believe God has plans for us to do this fall, this winter, for the next year, for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years. God has a plan to reach Pasco, Kennewick, Richland, Washington, and beyond. Will you allow what he's done in your life, how he has transformed you and changed you, brought you to this moment, will you allow him to use you to be a part of that plan? To reach your neighbors and your coworkers? Will you allow him to make you part of the joy, part of the glory of fulfilling his perfect plan? I hope the answer is yes. I hope that daily I wake up and the answer is yes for me. I say, God, I want it, however it is you want to use me today, whatever it is that you've led and prepared me for today. God, I want to respond to that. I want to follow you. I want to be in the midst of your plan. We're going to go ahead and close in prayer here. I hope we meditate on this and think about this throughout the week. And I hope that the same way that Mordecai's words spurred Esther to action, I hope that we're spurred to action, to walk in God's plan for our lives, to be used by him in amazing ways. God, thank you so much. God, so many times when I've prayed to you about using me or using those around me in different instances, I've said, God, just help us to get out of the way. God, help us to get out of the way so you can do whatever it is you have planned and whatever it is you want to do. And yet this week, I've been struck with this overwhelming thought that you don't want me to get out of the way. You actually want to include me. You actually would prefer that I would just step into your plan, that I would follow your lead, that you'd be able to use me to accomplish the things you want to accomplish. God, I pray that I would respond to that. I pray that you would help me daily when I wake up to commit to that, to submit to that. And I pray that for everyone in this room, that we would be awestruck with your love for us and your relationship that you have with us to the point that you want to involve us in the things that you're doing. You want your church, you've chosen your church to be the way that you're going to reach the world, and we're humbled by that. Please give us the strength, give us the wisdom, give us the faith to step out in that and to follow that. In Jesus' name, amen.